Thank you.
Yeah. I think with low maybe. Yeah. Um, Hi everyone. Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for to the Salt River Heritage Society for having me here. Thank you so much to the community of Salt River for coming out and to the friends who've showed up. My name is Atiyyah Khan. I'm an arts journalist based in Cape Town, but I'm from Joburg originally. And for the last 14 years, I've been covering arts and culture in Cape Town. And I suppose it's the role between arts and journalism that has kind of brought me here. So you need to forgive my awkwardness of the speech because I'm actually a behind the scenes kind of person. And writing is kind of what I do. And when Anwar asked me to do the speech, I really was resisting because, you know, Tina and Fatima did amazing work just before this. But yeah, they've also covered a lot of what I wanted to say, but what I wanted to say is specifically from a journalistic perspective, we know that Shireen was assassinated and murdered in the line of fire. And even the reports that came out after her death were very shady about how it happened. Even the way her funeral was handled was quite shocking. And even till today, there's been very little justice for her. I don't think her killers have been found, and I don't know if they will be. And also I'd like to highlight the fact that, you know, with the ongoing attacks currently happening in Gaza, why it's important to speak about Palestine, why it's important to make those connections between South Africa, our fight for freedom, and what's happening in Palestine, especially with what's going on now with the bombings in Gaza, right? So this is also a moment for me to acknowledge all women journalists on this Women's Day who are fighting like frontline journalism at the moment, who are basically risking their lives for the rest of us. And also recognizing Western media's failure in the cause for justice a lot of times. As a writer, I always get very frustrated at the language that's used by global media to write about a lot of these things. You know, there's certain languages that are used that constantly take away from the heaviness of the situation. In an interview, Shireen said, "I chose journalism to be close to the people. It may not be easy to change the reality, but at least I can bring their voice to the world." So I think in my own perspective as a journalist, and also within the framework of apartheid and our voices being silenced for so many years, my role in writing is to bring up those voices that have been silenced, is to talk about the struggles of Black and brown people in South Africa and artists and how that links to history, and also like who isn't being given a platform and why is that happening, and who controls the media and who controls the public spaces. So when I became a journalist, I wanted to be a frontline war reporter. I wanted to go to Sudan, I wanted to go to Palestine, and I realized that it's really not romantic in any way, and actually you need to be super brave, you need to be super thick-skinned, you need to be able to handle these situations on your own, away from your family many times. And I guess I chose art because that was my calling as somebody who loves music and theater and film. Yeah, and also on this Women's Day, I also want to talk about, you know, I don't need to go in too much depth because I think Tina really nailed it with that speech. But about the attacks that happened in Krugersdorp and the gang rapes that happened to those women, like, I don't see how we can go on every day and not think about that. And the ongoing violence that we face. So what is my connection to this mural, to this area, considering I'm from Joburg? What happened here? Why am I being asked to speak? So in 2020, I wrote a piece for a publication called Arts 24 that was about public art and the politics of public art in Cape Town. And one of the things it did was to look at what public and whose land. So when we talk about street art, graffiti, public art, how is it being placed in our cities? What are we looking at? How is it relevant to us as people in those areas? And one of the things I had to do, it was an investigative journalism piece, but I guess I can say on the record now that I must have done about 30 interviews for that piece, and most of the artists wanted to speak off the record because they were so afraid about losing work. Because all those people who control the money and the power are the ones who can literally take the food off their tables. So anyways, the story goes that in 2017, there was a festival held in Salt River called the International Public Arts Festival, run by a Belgian-founded organization called Baz Art. And Baz Art brought a series of artists, about 25 artists, to the area to paint murals without paying them, and also, basically convince the area, convince the neighborhood to give them wall space such as this. And not only were the artists exploited in the situation because they were getting work for free, but there was a host of international artists brought here and given space where locals were not given space. And also, they also got a lot of Israeli artists to come, and it was funded by the Israeli embassy, and this information was publicly on their website. So, in doing the story about who's public and what land and why, it was very important to talk about the fact that Salt River was not consulted as a community in this decision. And also that this was continuing to happen. Every year they were doing a festival. Every year they were bringing international artists, and every year less and less local artists. And I was there right from the start. I was actually on the streets painting with a friend of mine. And I think that this article brought to the attention of the Salt River Heritage Society about the politics of Baz Art. And over the last 2 years, they have vehemently started to fight against Baz Art. They've started to take things into their own hands, join forces, edit existing murals that were painted by, I guess what I want to say is that while we may think Salt River is a very normal, average community in South Africa, it's probably one of the wildest places I have come across. That there's this collective of aunties and uncles and kids and activists and intellectuals that have basically decided to map out the public space in a landscape and decide what they want on the walls. And it's not to say that the editing and the changing a lot of the murals to rhetoric about Palestine is like I spoke to Anwar and I said, not everybody supports Palestine. We can't just force it down people's throats. But I think what's important is the community taking control for themselves, by themselves, also trying to appreciate, you've got people who've got no knowledge about how art works, how spray cans work, how murals work, what should be paid, how they should be paid, but they're trying. And anyways, over the last 2 years, they've sourced their own walls, this being one of them. They've got local artists in to paint them. They've gotten content in, consultation with the community, and that consultation needs to be happening. But most of the time when we see these murals, the reason why I get so upset is because a lot of what's being represented has no relevance to us. It has no relevance to our history, no relevance to our identity. South Africa is not just black and white. There's a lot happening in between. So I tell stories about those who can't tell stories through writing, but mural arts and artworks, and these artists who are behind these artworks, are as talented as anyone in a gallery, as far as I'm concerned. So this is history being documented right in front of you. So I would say that what happened is that Baz Art eventually moved out of Salt River, and of course they've got the backing of the city, so of course they needed to go somewhere else, and so they went to District 6, which is just crazy because their whole manifesto from the start was about uplifting a society that's uplifting a community that looks like it's derelict, and also gentrification was really behind that. So we have to have the conversation about how gentrification and street art is used, and Woodstock is a very good example of how that happens. How artists are used as a tool for gentrification. This is like a really big thing happening, not only in Cape Town, in New York, in Brazil, all over the world. But basically, I think the victory here is that with the help of the article and the Salt River Heritage Society, they managed to tell Baz Art, as you can see by the logo over here. I'm probably going to get a defamation lawsuit after this, that's fine. But you know, like, you can see that something was done. And actually a few months ago, because this first article took so much out of me, took, as I said, 30 interviews, a lot of people who didn't want to speak on the record. A few months ago, I thought about writing about the small town at the tip of the continent that's basically having an art battle, like an art war. And how do we research that and write about that? But the going into the politics of it, and it was just so much. So I'm really happy to be able to say it now, and also inform some of you who might not know what's been happening. But this is really not to be ignored. It's really not happening anywhere else in the country. It should be documented, it should be appreciated. And yeah, so unfortunately, because Baz Art and all these other organizations, what they have is infrastructure, what they have is money, and what we have is just community and probably like no money or no funding. So what ultimately ends up happening is, because for any street artist or graffiti artist to go and get a permit from the city, you've got to go through so much red tape. You've got to get vendor forms, you've got to fill in, like, you know, go through so many bureaucratic processes that most artists just go straight through the organization. So what that just means is that Baz Art will continue, and other organizations like it. In Johannesburg, you've got a similar thing happening. All over the country you do. But these things, these institutions of power will continue. The city is backing it. There will be spaces. Every time you see a mural, you have to question, how did this happen? Who painted it? Who is it for? And what is the community getting out of that? So anyways, the reason to celebrate in this moment, I didn't look at my notes at all, so I just kind of free-willed it. But I think this is just, yeah, rewriting heritage and history back into our public walls and spaces, and that's really something to celebrate. So.
Nice one, Atiyyah.
Thank you so much, Atiyyah, for that. And now I'd like to welcome our last speaker,